1964. Mutsu Bay, northern Japan. Fishermen lower billions of tiny scallops to the ocean floor and wait. Up to that moment, the coastal waters of the island had been dying for 20 years. In 1942, a single small village was harvesting nearly 14,000 tons of scallops a year. By the 1960s, less than 100. But then something changed. Where there had been only sand, entire fields of shellfish began to appear. Shoals so dense they could be gathered by hand. The sea seemed to come alive again. 40 years later, a Japanese island had become the world's largest producer of scallops. Every year, billions of juveniles were released onto open seabed and people waited, and that very system produced a crisis no one had anticipated. Everything begins with the shellfish. Patinopecten yesoensis, the Japanese scallop, hotate. It is a bivalve that lives on sandy seabed at depths of 15 to 50 meters. The Sea of Okhotsk off Hokkaido is one of the richest places on the planet for this species. Sarifutsu is a village of fewer than 3,000 people at the very northern tip of Hokkaido. In winter, temperatures drop to -27. The Sea of Okhotsk freezes, but it is precisely the ice that makes the scallops so valuable. Siberian plankton carried on drifting floes feeds the shellfish all winter. The fishermen of Sarifutsu did not merely revive a fishery, they transformed the harshest coastline in Japan into its most productive point. In winter, the Siberian ice drift brings plankton from the north. The scallops grow large, meaty, sweet. That is why Hokkaido hotate became one of the most expensive seafood products in the world. From the late 19th century, Hokkaido fishermen built their lives on this. By the 1930s, the annual catch reached 80,000 tons across the island. Villages along the Okhotsk coast lived and breathed scallops, processing plants, family boats, cooperatives passed from father to son. Then came the war, and after it, there were another 25 years of decline. The mechanism was simple and brutal. Fishermen took everything, adults and juveniles, whatever the nets caught. Chesapeake Bay, the largest estuary in the United States, the same story played out with oysters. By the 1880s, the catch reached 20 million bushels a year. By the 1990s, it was less than 1% of the peak. The fishing industry declared it impossible to restore. Too expensive, too late. Some scientists agreed. The first attempt to save the fishery was the obvious one. Ban the catch. Let the population recover on its own. It did not work. Scallops did not return even in areas where they had not been fished for years. The seabed remained empty. Fishermen who dove in those years described the same thing. Sand. Flat, empty, motionless. Where scallops had once lain so densely they could be gathered by hand. Now, nothing. Sea stars, the scallop's primary predator, had multiplied instead. Without prey, the predator waits. This is where the real problem became clear. The ban removed pressure from above but did not address what was happening below. Juveniles that did appear were destroyed by predators before they could grow. The population was no longer falling, but it was not growing either. The system was stuck. In the fishing cooperatives, they called this the dead point. The sea was alive but empty. And waiting for nature to correct the situation on its own meant waiting decades, which no one had. It became clear that the population had dropped below the threshold from which natural recovery was no longer possible. There were too few adults to produce sufficient offspring. There were too many predators, sea stars and crabs, destroying juveniles before they could grow. Then someone proposed an idea that sounded like waste. Raise juveniles in protected conditions, and release them directly onto open seabed. No fences, no supervision. Simply pour billions of tiny scallops into the water and hope that at least some survive. The skeptics had concrete arguments. First, survival. A juvenile scallop in the wild has minimal chances. Sea stars, crabs, fish, everything eats the young. Releasing billions and recovering a fraction was irrational. Second, control. Scallops move. They can drift anywhere. How do you guarantee that what you catch is what you released? These arguments were reasonable, but they failed to account for one thing. Toyosaku Kudo was not a scientist. He was a fisherman from Mutsu Bay in Aomori Prefecture, neighboring Hokkaido. In 1964, he did a simple thing. He took an onion mesh bag and used it as a collector for scallop larvae. Larvae attached to surfaces while searching for a place to settle, and the bag gave them an ideal one. The result was remarkable. The quantity of juveniles collected increased by orders of magnitude compared to previous methods. Suddenly, it was possible to raise young scallops in vast numbers, cheaply, quickly, and reliably. The technology spread across Hokkaido within a few years. But the juvenile collection technology was only the first step. The second step was taken by the fishing cooperatives. And this is where the part of the story that rarely gets told begins. The fishermen of Sarafutsu, a small village on the northern coast of Hokkaido, decided not simply to release juveniles and catch whatever could be caught. They divided their 38,400 hectares of fishing grounds into 4 zones. Each year, they imposed a 3-year ban on harvest in one zone. After 3 years, they moved to the next. Rotation, like a field left fallow. 4 zones, 4 years. In parallel, they organized mass predator removal. Sea stars were destroying juvenile scallops in enormous quantities. Fishermen targeted sea stars deliberately, simply to clear the seabed. Predator removal was systematic and intensive. In 1975, 11 years after Kudo's invention, Hokkaido was releasing 600 million juveniles a year and harvesting 70,000 tons of scallops. By 2002, the number of juveniles released had grown to 2.1 billion a year, and production reached 272,000 tons. In 2012, the Hokkaido fishery received Marine Stewardship Council certification as the most sustainable in the world, with an annual harvest of 410,000 tons. That is more than the historical peak before overfishing. The fishermen had created something that had never existed before. The fishermen of Sarafutsu discovered a different sea 40 years after the first juvenile release. Every morning from June through August, they left the harbor at 4:30 and returned with 11 tons per boat. Consistently. The scallops were where they had been seeded. They had not drifted away. The system that skeptics had called irrational proved more precise than any traditional fishery. Sarafutsu alone now harvests 40,000 tons a year, 400 times the amount at the lowest point of the collapse. And the fishermen no longer ask where to find scallops. They know where they are because they put them there themselves. In Lake Saroma, a coastal lagoon connected to the Sea of Okhotsk through 2 artificial channels, the system is even more precise. Each of the 59 cooperative members has a personal quota. Each has a specific section of seabed allocated to them. Entering someone else's section is as forbidden as entering someone else's field. Every member knows that if they tend their seabed, it is theirs. No one will come and harvest what they have grown. This is the condition that most fisheries around the world lack, a clear property right over the results of one's own labor. But the unexpected result lay in what happened to the fishermen themselves. The system they built required every cooperative member to submit to common rules. They were required not to fish in a closed zone, even when scallops were visible to the naked eye. They had to participate in predator removal, even when it brought no direct income. They had to share information about seabed conditions with neighbors, even when those neighbors were competitors. This contradicted the entire logic of fishing as it had existed before. Traditionally, every fisherman pulled in his own direction. First come, first fish. Hokkaido did the opposite, and it worked, but only because every fisherman had a direct material interest in making the system function. If a neighbor fishes in a closed zone, the entire rotation suffers. Your own catch suffers 2 years from now. Control turned out to be not governmental but horizontal, neighbor watching neighbor. And there is one more detail that explains why the system worked at all. In 1970, the Sarafutsu Cooperative made a decision that seemed impossible for fishermen: a mandatory monthly deduction from each member's income into a shared investment fund. Not a voluntary contribution, but a compulsory deduction. The money went toward purchasing juveniles, equipment, and predator removal. Fishermen who had been accustomed to spending a day's earnings by evening agreed to a system where a portion of the money disappeared before it ever reached their hands. Why? Because they could see that those who had seeded their grounds 3 years earlier were already harvesting. Future earnings were visible and concrete. That is the difference between a system that works and one that stays on paper. Scientists called this a co-management model for shared resources. The fishermen just called it common sense. And there is one more thing that sets Sarifutsu apart from most fishing cooperatives. Profits are divided equally among all members, boat owners and hired fishermen alike. The difference is negligible. Even after retirement at 60, members receive dividends. A system that demands that everyone submit to its rules guarantees in return an equal share of the outcome. But there is one more unexpected result, and it is a worse one. A system that produces 2.1 billion juveniles a year needs a market. Hokkaido found one in China. By 2022, China accounted for more than half of all Japanese scallop exports, approximately $641 million a year. For some Hokkaido companies, the share was even higher. Not just a majority, almost everything. In August 2023, Japan began releasing treated water from Fukushima into the ocean. China banned the import of all Japanese seafood the same day. Hokkaido lost its market in 24 hours. But there is a detail that explains why the blow landed so deeply. Hokkaido was not simply selling scallops to China, it was sending them there for processing. Cheap labor opened the shells, froze the meat, packaged the product, and the finished scallops then went on to the United States, Europe, and Taiwan under a Japanese label. China was not just a market, it was part of the production chain. When the ban came, Japanese companies found themselves without processors. Some began relocating production to Vietnam. Others invested in automated shell opening machines right in Hokkaido. It cost more, but for the first time in decades, scallops were being processed at home. Fishermen who had built the most efficient marine farm in the world suddenly found themselves with 2 billion juveniles and nowhere to sell them. In November 2025, China lifted the ban. The first 6 tons of Hokkaido scallops went to China 2 years and 2 months after the blockade began. But 10 prefectures, including Fukushima, remain under prohibition to this day. And Japanese companies that spent 2 years being forced to find new markets now say they are in no hurry to return to the old dependency. The crisis that was supposed to destroy the industry forced it to become more resilient. The Japanese government allocated 80 billion yen to help fishermen survive the crisis. The United States began purchasing Hokkaido scallops in bulk for military bases. But this is not a solution, it is a bandage. The question that remains unanswered is whether a system built over 40 years around a single market can survive when that market disappears in a single day. Hokkaido is diversifying its exports to Southeast Asia, Europe, and the United States, but replacing 93% is hard.